Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So, if you are a system administrator or a DevOps engineer or just a Linux enthusiast, right? So, understanding the Linux boot process is essential for troubleshooting and optimizing the system performance. So, I will share this link in the description box also so that you can go through and you can also get these notes, right? So, let's just get started. So in this video, we will break down the Linux boot process step by step from the moment you power on your system until you reach the login screen. So whether you are a beginner or expert experience in Linux, so this guide will help you to grasp how Linux start up and what happens under the hood. So let's dive in. So let's talk about what the Linux boot process is first. The Linux boot process is a sequence of events that occurs from the moment a system is powered on until the user gets a fully functional operating system. It involves multiple stages and each playing a crucial role in initializing the system. So understanding the process is essential for the system administrator, DevOps engineer, and Linux enthusiast. So we have 6 stages in the Linux boot process, right? So whenever we are hitting the power on button on our machine, so how all the things are working in the backend. So this is all about that. So I created this image diagram to understand how this process looks like in an easy manner, right? So you can also check more about the Linux boot process in each and every step, what is happening, right? So let's start with the first, that is BIOS or UEFI initialization. So BIOS means basic input output system. So whenever the computer is powered on, so the BIOS performs a power on self test that is also called the post to check the hardware integrity. So BIOS will identify bootable device like hard disk, SSD, USB drives, right? So it will check whether everything is working fine or not that is connected to the your system. So it's load the first sector that is called the MBR master boot recorder from the bootable disk and hand over control to the bootloader, right? So we also have different method that is called UEFI. Okay, it was the earlier days that it was used. Now we are using the UEFI. So UEFI is a modern replacement for the BIOS and offering a faster boot times and better security features unlike the BIOS. So UEFI uses the EFI system partitioner instead of MVR, and UEFI directly loads the bootloader from the ESP or uses the built-in boot manager. Now let's talk about the boot execution. So once the bootloader is initiated, okay, the bootloader is responsible for loading the kernel into the memory, right? So it will include grub, Lilo, and sys Linux, right? So grub is a grand unified bootloader, most widely used, support multiple operating system. Then we have the Lilo, that is Linux loader. So older bootloader now rarely used. And sys Linux is the used in the lightweight Linux distribution. So let's understand the grub boot process. So the BIOS or UEFI loads the grub stage 1, a small piece of code located in the MBR or the ESP. Then we have the group stage 2 that will store that data into the boot partition and loads the kernel into the init trams. Then grub will present a boot menu allowing user to select an OS pass custom kernel parameters. Then we have the once the user select the entry, grub loads the selected kernel into the memory. So whenever you are hitting the power on button, so you will get a screen if you are using Linux. So you need to select like what kind of operating system you want to use. So once you hit that, so it start loading the kernel and it will initialize the init processes. So the kernel stored a VM Linux, a compressed binary is loaded into the memory, and the uh, kernel decompress itself and initialize system hardware and CPU memory storage ECT. So kernel initialized device drivers and mounts the root file system in the read mode only. A temporary file system called init rams, that is initialization RAM file system, is loaded to help mount the root file system properly. So once the kernel is loaded, it will initialize the init processes. So we have different init processes, right? And it will also check the file system that is mounted with the different storage. So init infra initial RAM file system contains essential drivers and script needed before the root file system is accessible. Then it helps mount disk based root file system, especially for the RAID, LVM, or the encrypted partition. So once the root file system is mounted, intra RAMs is discarded and the control is handed over to the init processes. Okay, so once the kernel is loaded, all these file system are checked. Now it will load the multiple init processes. So we have different init processes. The init system is the first user space started by the kernel, and it is responsible for managing system started processes, launching background service like daemons, and handling user session. So there are three main init processes in the Linux. So we widely use the system D, that is the most common in the modern Linux distribution. So default init system in the Ubuntu, RHEL, CentOS, Fedora, and Arch Linux. So use the parallel execution for the faster boot time. So at the same time, it will initialize multiple processes so that they can get a faster boot time. Then it will manage services using the systemctl command, and the init system start essential services like networking, logging, and the SSH. So once these SSH services are started, then user will get a option to log in into the your machine, right? So after the init process complete, the system initialization, the login prompt is presented. So user login in a using a username or the password. So once it is authenticated, the user gets the access to the shell or the desktop environment. So it's a summary of the Linux boot process. So you can see we have different stages and what at what stages what it is doing. So you can also check out from here. And we also added some troubleshooting the Linux boot process. Okay. So you can also check out. It will help you to, uh, to troubleshoot the issue. And it is widely asked question in the interview as well. So I hope you understand what is Linux boot process, and I will see you in the next lecture. Thanks for watching.